Hey, it's your old pal Steve Areno, and I'm back with a continuation of my Civil War themed videos. Memoirs of a Civil War Reenactor, Part 2. Take 1. Boom. Okay, this one's going to be a look at the uniforms of the 1st Louisiana Tiger, the 5th New York Zouave, and the 146th New York Zouaves. Are illustrated here. You're going to see the pieces from forms in a minute. Elsewhere in the video, we're going to go over the Tigers, the 5th New York State Volunteer Infantry, Duryers, Zouaves as they were known, and then we'll be talking about the 146th New York State Volunteers. Had a couple different references to this group. This was their uniform over here. We'll be talking about that. But before I get into that, I thought I would mention that another thing that happens when you get into this Civil War reenacting, and if you're a friendly person, people sort of have stuff and then they send it your way.
Reminds me of a time I was at an event and I was standing there and a guy walked up and he goes, "Hey, see if this fits." And I tried it on and it was just fantastic, almost brand new federal greatcoat. And he goes, "Hey, I have this. I'm not going to use it. Looks like you could use it." And there you go. Enjoy.
Example was a kit that came out many years ago, and a guy had it, and he got this to me because he never built it. So maybe we'll build it. That's great. And another thing is there's another book that was published. It was kind of a shorter run book, but it was on the 146th New York. Went into some of the officers who were very, very heroic, in the course of battles that the unit fought. And somebody got me a really nice ribbon that was worn at a regimental reunion. And this thing is very old and it's in extremely fine condition. And you see here, it's just really fantastic. But apparently this reunion happened, and I don't know if you can see it there, but it happened on October 9th, 1908, and it was commemorating on this, I don't even know what you call this. It's a really nice image that's imprinted on this, maybe it's a tintype, on this metal framed badge here in the center of the ribbon, Major H. Curran, and obviously it was the 41st reunion of the 146th New York Volunteer Infantry. Where they got together there in Taberg, New York. So that, somebody got this to me, because they said, "Hey, you're 146. I got something. Here you go," it's just really, really fantastic. I'll bring that up closer to the camera so you can see this. Isn't that nice? Wow. And then another thing that somebody got for me, got to me, I should say, is this. This is an actual axe, and it has a certificate that the person sent me with it, but it says hand axe, found by Terry Hillman in the Louisiana camp near Fairfax, Virginia, and he found it on August 25th, 1988. And it was just buried, and they found it there, and now here it is, in my collection. So I'm going to keep it all together, all this stuff, and then, we don't all live forever, so I got to figure out how to get all this stuff to a museum or something someday. Okay, so there's that. All right, after this, we'll get into the uniforms.
Okay, your old pal Steve Areno back, and I thought as a continuation from my other video, Memoirs of a Civil War Reenactor, I would actually explain the 3 different Zouave uniforms I have. Taking them in order, we'll start with the
1st Louisiana Volunteer Infantry, Company B Tiger Rifles.
Okay, with this particular uniform, I've got it laid out here on the table. It won't all fit in the same frame if you're going to be able to see it at any detail. I'm going to obviously start from the top, which is what you're looking at now, and then work down to the other main uniform pieces. I've already previously discussed the unique Tiger fez, right, which is not like any other Zouave unit type fez. The other thing is this red shirt, which has the bone buttons, and it was what they called a fireman style collar. That's just what they called that type of shirt back in those days. And obviously the Zouave jacket, which is a very short jacket. Unique to the Tigers, this particular jacket was trimmed with the red trim set in and only a single row around the cuff. There was no spike chevron. It just went around the bottom of the sleeve cuff there. It was a very plain jacket. It was finished off with Osberg cotton lining. The jacket itself was wool. It's my understanding that Walker was the one who came up with the red shirt, and it was very typical on the day that he was going to fight that he would be wearing a red fighting shirt. And so the Tigers carried that forward into the Civil War in honor or as a salute to him being part of the Louisiana Battalion. All right, let me pause the camera here and we'll step down to the pantaloons, the socks, and then the gaiters. Okay, here we go on the pantaloons. But the jacket was short. Those days folks wore their pants/trousers above their navel. So even though it's a short jacket, it would have overlapped. The bottom of the jacket would have overlapped the top of the pantaloons. And then a belt would have been worn right at the navel. So you would have had a little bit of pantaloon showing above the belt. There's obviously in the day before zippers, so there were no buttons here. It was kind of a novel setup. There was like a covering behind the opening at the top there. Gathering and closing and holding at the top. There was just a simple set of ties. It's the same string around front and back, and you just tied it here. Obviously, it ran, in a channel that was sewn around here at the top. There were pockets on each side. After that, it's just big pleated all the way around bag of for the pantaloon. It's very, very simplified. The one for the 5th New York I'll show later is a little bit more complex, but for the Tigers it was pretty straightforward. My understanding is these were machine sewn, and in the days before the Tiger Rifles left New Orleans, sewing machines were just humming all over town, building their uniforms for them. Okay, so then moving down here to this end, we have, I'm going to fold this up so we can see, we have the distinctive Tiger socks that they wore. Look a little funny here because there's no leg in it, but with a leg it would have obviously been stretched out for the leg and the calf.
Pantaloons tied just above the calf.
In here and then down, to the ankles. And then this sort of 5-button gaiters here, bone buttons, very short, so there would have been a lot of sock showing between the top of the gaiter and the bottom of the pantaloon. They're just pretty straightforward cotton gaiters, and then of course they would have fit over the booties. All right, okay, now we come to the uniform of the 5th New York. Though this is not my oldest uniform, it's the one that has seen the most actual field wear. And as most reenactors know, but I'll mention in case some folks in there aren't reenactors, they didn't dry clean their uniforms in the Civil War, so as reenactors, or certainly as campaign-oriented reenactors, we don't dry clean ours either. We just brush them off. Palm fiber brushes or something like that is what you just brush all the dirt that gets into the wool. All this up in here is just sun fading, which is normal for this type of, the materials we get for our reenacting uniforms are made by certain people that are in the hobby, just everywhere up and down the Civil War reenacting hobby. You just meet the greatest folks in the world. And there's some folks who make authentic fabrics, and that's where we start. Authentic uniforms from authentic fabrics as much as possible. So, taking it from the top, this is the very distinctive fez for the 5th New York. It features a gold-colored tassel, and it isn't this shape when you start out, but what you do is you shape it by folding it back to fit on your head, and it sort of fits like that, okay? And then around this, you can, and sometimes do, most of the time you do, you have, this thing's about 10 to 12 feet long, and you fold it in half, and you fold it in half again, and then you go round and round and round, twisting it as you go around, just twisting, and then tuck it in. And it was worn a very distinctive way, and after you've been a 5th New York reenactor for a while, it'll become automatic how you do this. Again, you brush it off, you don't really take it to the dry cleaners or anything like that. So over the course of about a little over 20 years, this is my uniform after about 20 years of reenacting. Okay, so put that over there. Now, this particular jacket, as I moved up the ranks, I was a corporal and then a sergeant, and then it turned out that I moved up to serve on battalion for about 5 years as the sergeant major.
I guess I'll say a couple words here about being the sergeant majors. I never intended, and it was a function of the fact that our club was pretty big. We had many companies of different soldiers, I was always that guy who sort of was able to read the manual. People would say, "Hey, go down and ask that guy down there." And I always tried helping people who were trying to, honor and represent the soldiers who they had chosen to depict and do a good job with it. And I thought it was just fantastic, helping them out with their marching and how to do this and that and the other. And next thing I know, they asked me to come on up to battalion. That's different, because when you're functioning that way, you don't work with your own unit. You're working as a sergeant major with the sergeants of the other companies, and then they in turn are working with their second and third sergeants and their first, second, and third corporals, and of course those folks work with the privates. So I ended up working with the lieutenant colonel of our club, the major, and the adjutant. And then working with all the sergeants, the first sergeants of all their respective companies. Got a long way from being a private, which was sort of what I really enjoyed doing, but eventually I made it back. And so I went back to being a private, which was my first appreciation.
And that's the markings you see here. These are the sergeant major rank markings. And the NCO jackets in the 5th New York, they were different than the enlisted men's in that they featured this type of edging, which is this red wool felt. And then that was further trimmed in gold. And these things right here, these cobra-shaped items, they're called tombeaus. Instead of being made out of tape, which you'll see on the privates' uniforms, in the non-commissioned officers, the NCOs, they were actually plackets that were applied like this and then outlined in gold bullion. So that's what you see on the jacket I have here. And then these are fabric-covered buttons. They're gendarme buttons, which were typical for the NCO jacket. So again, this is the jacket I wore, and it's finished off on the inside. It didn't have a pocket, so I got a piece of scrap fabric and attached pocket, and the sergeant major certainly would have had a pocket watch to keep track of time so that orders were carried out on schedule. So I made a little loop there to attach my pocket watch. The shirt is kind of a placket shirt. The buttons are underneath here, and they're covered by this placket that's also trimmed in gold. And there's a top button that's exposed, and that's in the recounts of the 5th New York uniforms, that's just the way it would have been done. You have to remember, this shirt is like almost like a vest. It seemed like to function like a vest. There would have been an undershirt, which was your undergarments worn under this. Okay, so I think that's what I wanted to say about the fez, the tassel, the jacket, and the shirt. And I'll pause and move the camera down so we can catch the rest of the uniform. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the sash a little bit with this particular uniform. So wrapping, it's about 10 feet long, so wrapping, and it's made out of red wool with blue tape, about 10 feet long, and you wrap it round and round and around your waist to close the area between the top of the pantaloons and of course the shirt with the jacket over top, right? The real trick on this though is because it's trimmed on the same side with this decorative motif at each end, you have to fold it a certain way, which you'll learn after a while. It'll become almost automatic. But what you want it to do is, in the end, it depends on your waist size, because remember it's 10 feet long. You have to figure out how to do it so that it ends up like this, falling off of the left side. And you'll pick it up after you've been a 5th New York reenactor for a little bit. It'll become automatic. But that's how it wants to fall. It comes out, this is round and round around your waist. You've got the jacket, the pantaloons, and then you want the two tails ending up just like this, just touching. And the 5th New York historically was very consistent in the way they wrapped the top of their fez with what I showed you earlier, that turban wrap, and then how they wore their sash, and each man always being like this. And they tended to be very uniform in the way they turned out. All right, let me pause here and we'll move down to the gaiters and jambiers. Okay, the last three pieces I'm going to talk about are the gaiters, the jambiers, and though already mentioned, the pantaloons. I'm going to talk about the sort of area at the bottom of the pantaloons. So what has to happen is you put the gaiters on first, and you'll notice that the buttons are differentially laid out here. Let me see if I can bring this up in the center of the camera, right? And so when you get a pair of these, they're all the same. And what you want to do is you want to take them and put them around each leg, right and left. They're not going to be the same. You I'm going to go in through here with a pencil and mark, and then that's where you're going to want to sew your buttons. And that's going to cause, the area bigger where you have the heel and the arch of your foot, your ankle, and then as your leg comes up and starts to widen up to your calf, this differential pattern is going to make it then fit pretty snugly around your leg. Then what you do is you have these two ties at the top. You tie them off, and then what I like to do is I like to bring up my jambière, and the way this works is you have these leather ties here. You feed them through the holes, and then you catch each one and daisy chain it as you're going up, like this, right? So you got this one catches this one, right? Now that's locked in, and then the next one goes up and does a similar fashion, comes up and catches this one, and then it goes on its journey on up, and it catches the next one, so on and so forth all the way to the top. And then the last one comes through the hole, catches on this belt, okay? Now a little something I like to do is, now this is up here next to that, is I bring this around and I tie it around this strap before I buckle it. And then the bottom of the pantaloons are tied, and I bring this back string of the gaiter through that tie, right? Before I go through and tie it to this loop. And that, for me, has always kept everything together up here at the top and not let stuff come apart relative to one another, so that you end up with your jambière sliding down over your calf. Now, it might be something that just happens to me because I have pretty small wrists and ankles. I'm kind of thin-boned, even though I'm a big guy. I've got real small wrists and ankles. I can almost get my finger around it. So anyway, that's the complete 5th New York uniform, and it's been very, very durable. The last comment was, I understand it was one of the most authentic to the French original uniform, with the exception of having U.S. marking designations for rank, corporals, sergeants, and such on the sleeves of the jacket. Okay, the next uniform we're going to talk about is the uniform of the 146th New York State Volunteer Zouaves. However, as I'm going to show here in a second, it isn't really a Zouave uniform per se. It's something much more specific and particular, although it was worn during the U.S. Civil War. So how this one came about was I was on a reenactment trip flying out of, I think it was Dulles Airport, and I happened to pass by, and this book had just been published. And so I thought, well, it's going to be a long flight, so I'm going to go ahead and pick this book up and I can start reading it on the way home. It came out in 2000, and so it sort of sat back there on the back of my mind for a while. And little by little, I got the idea that maybe I wanted to learn a little bit more about this uniform, this unit, and maybe pursue this uniform. Although I did not really, this turned out to be my most ambitious project that I'm yet undertaken in terms of Civil War reenacting, which I'll explain in just a second. Well, another connection, many of the 5th New York regiment guys had signed 2-year papers, and some of them had signed 3-year enlistment papers. And when it came up that the 2-year time of service was over, the remaining 3-year men, what they did is rather than just let them go home with the 2-year men, they had 1 more year of service. And so what happened is they were moved in to join those guys who were coming in to the 146th. I hope that wasn't confusing. So right off the bat, after the firing on Fort Sumter, 5th New York forms, 2 types of papers, 2-year and 3-year papers. Didn't realize the difference, signed it. 2-year men are mustered out. 3-year men have 1 more year. Meantime, 146 New York is being formed and getting ready to go into the field. They took the 3-year men from 5th New York and moved them in. So there was a continuity connection of service between the 5th New York 3-year men and continuing on with the 146th New York. Maybe that's clear. All right, so let me bring these other materials up here on deck just a second. Okay, so this is a page out of Don Traiani's book. Just a fantastic book. Don Traiani's Regiments and Uniforms of the Civil War. And on page 93, there's information on the 146th New York Infantry. The specific point I'm going to make right now is found right down here. It says, technically, the 146 did not get Zouave uniforms, but the yellow-trimmed light blue uniforms of the Tirailleurs Algériens, or Toucours, or the French colonial army. Okay, so these were specific and particular uniforms from the French Zouaves that they were trying to replicate here for the U.S. Army. You'll notice that the trousers, they're not pantaloons, but they're actually more like trousers. And we'll get into later when I show you the uniform, the trim was completely different. And obviously the color was very different. Okay, so by now you folks have figured out, having watched my previous video, perhaps, of the 1st Louisiana Special Battalion Tiger Rifles, that I do a lot of research before I get into any ordering or working specifically on the uniforms. And I enjoy this part of it. So this is from my binder on the 146th, and I went through and worked out the org chart from where they served, what unit, and here's a time where they were just entering. The last guys of the 5th New York are entering while the 146th was coming in. So they're exiting, they're coming in, and then they were, of course, combined together. More information on timeline, et cetera, et cetera. But the point I'm trying to get to, they served all the way to and they were present at the surrender at Appomattox, okay, over here, right? The ceremony where they had the surrender 1865, April 9th at Appomattox Courthouse. So where I was going with that was that there's a great book which recounts the chronicle of the campaigns, and that was written by Mary Genevieve Green Bernard, Campaigns of the 146th Regiment, New York. Just an awesome resource. Tons of pictures in there and plates. So when it comes to the actual uniform, I had 2 starts on this. I had the first start, which was back in 2003, and the person who took my order and started working, they kind of abandoned the project. That was after several years, and I had to restart it again in 2009. So it's been a long project to accomplish, and I'm looking forward to being able to wear the uniform. I've worn it once, but I'll at some other opportunities perhaps in the future. But in terms of the pieces, there is a lot of detailed research out there on this uniform by examining and measuring uniforms that are in museum collections, a couple different places around the United States. It is a highly detailed uniform. The thing I'll say here about it, it's all 100% hand sewn. Each soldier's uniform in the 146th was hand sewn, which is just incredibly elaborate considering, that expense. I don't know of any other unit. There probably might have been, but I don't know of it yet, where all the soldiers had 100% hand sewn uniforms. Well, there are many unique features to this uniform, which is part of the reason it's so hard to find anybody who will make it for you. And so I just kind of flashed by these pictures to show some of the research that folks have done, and hats off to them, full credit. It was C.J. Daly who led the team and some other people. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this uniform here. I'll start by discussing the image that's on the front of the book. And what you'll notice on the cover image and also at plates throughout the book is that there was no vest worn or issued with this particular uniform. Instead, what the soldiers took to doing was wearing some sort of a checkered shirt. Happens to be that this one I have right here is what's called a Roush shirt. It has 2 rows of pleats gathered here and a solid placket in the center. It's backed with some thick canvas in this area because this portion is like a decorative insert panel into the shirt fabric. But something like this checkered pattern, I also have another one that's blue and white, would have been similar to what you see throughout all the images, the period images in the book. So I wanted to mention that real quick. Second thing is, while the fez itself was very similar to the 5th New York fez, what a lot of the soldiers did was they detached the sweatband, they turned up the brim and then reattached the sweatband. So it was more like a beanie style fez in the final installation. And also particular to the 146th, the tassel, though it was gold, it was very full. It was much bigger. I wouldn't even know how to characterize it exactly, except to say that each one of these cords it's got volume to it. It's much bigger, so it's fuller. Okay. I don't want to go too much into it here. I'll just point out a couple things. In addition to being all hand sewn, which I've said already, There's this round cord that's applied right on the edge all the way around. You've got 5-row webbing here. You've got 3-row webbing here for the tombeau. The 5-row comes back for the pendant chevron on the sleeve. And another piece that's very, very interesting is that these buttons, the 3 buttons on each sleeve, are true buttonholes and actually operate. So you could open it up and fold it back, I guess. Or maybe it was just meant to be a little bit higher end, or more detailed tailoring. But when you multiply that by 1,000 men, it's incredible that they had these handmade uniforms supplied to each soldier for this unit. Okay, inside there's a lot of detail in here. The guy who made this for me just did a fantastic job. Like I said, it took a long time to get it, but it was well worth the wait. I mean, I've never seen anything quite like this work here. It's museum quality. Okay, so I will bring the sash in after we talk a little bit about this first. I want to be able to show this detail. So it's reverse pleated front and back, okay, all the way around. And then there's a special belt at the back with this buckle. You see that it has these paperback buttons for the suspenders in front and back, as well as a double at the waistband, and then of course, down the fly. There's a lot of detail with the interior. I don't want to discount it or slight it. It's just fantastic. What's the interior work for the pockets, and there's double pockets here, and special pockets, and it just really elaborate trousers or pantaloons. Then I'll sort of bring these up here in camera to sort of finish it off. Just the pleating at the bottom and the button just below the knee. There's just an incredible amount of work in here. It's really almost too nice to wear, this uniform. At least, as a reenactor, I'm pleased to have it. There's a watch pocket up here. It just goes on and on and on, right? It's just really fantastic, just the job that this fellow did for me. And then, not to discount it, but just by comparison, the sash is kind of plain, even though that in itself is all hand sewn, really done nicely. And of course, his pantaloons were worn above the navel, and the jacket was short. It's 12 inches wide here. It still would have covered quite a bit of area, something like that. Okay, so really fantastic uniform. Real pleased to have it. Really excited that it's finished. Can't wait for the first opportunity to wear it. Okay, so just for completeness, I'm showing the bottom of the pantaloons, the jambières, and the gaiters, and I've kind of had to make a decision, so I'm showing what the outside looks, but obviously the outsides are turned, flat up, facing up to you, so it wouldn't look like that in true life, but it just sort of gives you somewhat of a representation of what the outside down the sightseeing would have looked like. So you've got the lacing, which I've gone over before. It's the same exact pieces for the 5th New York. You've got the jambières and the gaiters and the top of the gaiters here, which you have to somehow connect into the bottom of the pantaloons. The difference on these is these button on the inside versus the 5th New York and the Tiger Zouave's tie on the outside. Okay, but other than that, same idea, keeping gravel and weeds out and giving some kind of abrasion protection with these leather pieces over your caps.
Okay, that's about it for this video. I hope you found it interesting. Bye.